Now out in cinemas is Alien Romulus, the latest entry in the Alien franchise that takes place between the events of Alien from 1979 and the sequel Aliens, which came out in 1986. With Ridley Scott having directed the last two films that were set years before Alien, he steps back into the producer role, with Fede Alvarez now directing, who had pitched his own idea to Disney in March of 2022. The studio were looking to continue the franchise, but weren't keen to continue the David storyline after Alien Covenant underperformed at the box office. Fede suggested a self-contained story that didn't carry over any baggage from the other films, but the story would end up making references to the other movies. Originally intended as a film for streaming with no theatrical release in mind, and the production was given a budget of around $80 million. That number may have been smaller during the early stages, but once a theatrical window was decided, the cost to make it may have increased. Fede would bring on a number of crew members from the previous films to work on the production, with the legendary Alec Gillis from Studio ADI working under their Legacy Effects name, who had worked on Aliens, Alien 3, Resurrection and the AVP films, to be the special effects supervisor, and other technicians were brought on board who specialised in certain areas, like for example the chestburster sequence. Fede wanted to have a lot of practical effects for the cast to interact with, so there is animatronic facehuggers and performers in suits for the xenomorphs. They even made use of miniatures for the spacecrafts, proper old school filmmaking using modern tools to enhance the footage. They wanted to keep within that future of the 1980s, so you have old school CRT monitors for the computers. It feels very much like the original films. There is visual continuity there, so it doesn't feel out of place unlike Prometheus, which had technology that seemed far more advanced. The film wouldn't make use of UK production facilities like the original 3 films, and instead would be shot in Budapest in Hungary to keep the costs down. For the film's story, it's set 20 years after the events of Alien. We find ourselves on a mining colony and introduced to Rain Carradine. She has a synthetic human called Andy as a close friend, who has a basic program to protect her. Her ex-boyfriend Tyler and his friends discover a derelict spacecraft orbiting the planet. It's a Weyland-Yutani space station that has stasis chambers so they can go into hypersleep to escape the planet, as the corrupt company won't let them leave the mining colony. They get on board the derelict spacecraft, which turns out to be a research outpost divided into sections Romulus and Remus. There appears to be no crew members on board, and they are puzzled to what has happened. Tyler, Bjorn and Andy find the stasis chambers intact, but they are lacking power and they need to get more fuel. They manage to locate a chamber and start securing the fuel, inadvertently reviving frozen facehuggers inside, triggering an automatic lockdown. The facehuggers are let loose, and in the chaos the team manage to escape, but things take a turn for the worse as the space station is being pulled closer to the planet and they are running out of time, and the facehuggers are roaming the ship. I was pretty confident the film would turn out well with the talent involved. Fede Alvarez can handle horror well, having directed the remake of Evil Dead and Don't Breathe. He was a big fan of the franchise, and from the early stages he seemed to have come up with a clear vision for this sequel. And having just watched it, I was really pleased with the end results. Critics and some fans are declaring it the third best in the franchise, with Alien and Aliens of course still taking the top spot. What makes it work is that it has a simple story that doesn't get too ambitious, which may suggest they didn't go too crazy because it was originally intended for streaming, but I think it works in its favour. It doesn't get bogged down with anything philosophical, it's just a straight up horror sci-fi with a bit of action thrown in. What's key in the Alien franchise is the characters. You get invested in their journey and don't want them to die. The AVP films made that mistake by having poorly written characters who you are more than happy to see get killed off. Romulus has a solid cast of actors who may be unknown to most people, with perhaps Kaylee Spaney being the most recognisable, having starred in Priscilla and Civil War. So to most people you are seeing fresh faces who all do a superb job. The dialogue and how the actors interact give a good sense of believability to it. It carries over the natural conversations that Alien had. The actors don't come across as overacting. They don't do stupid things that drive you mad. Prometheus and Alien Covenant were both criticised for the characters making silly decisions and mistakes on purpose to drive the plot. That results in just annoying the audience, and Romulus doesn't do that in my opinion. There's a good sense of logic to the story and how the characters justify their actions. If you're going into this to be really scared, it doesn't really get that scary. It's more focused around tension and being creepy. There's a lot of shots of actors in the foreground and something behind them out of focus is moving, which is an old trick that works 95% of the time and gets you on edge. It doesn't shy away from the gore, but with a 15 rating it's not too excessive, unlike Alien Resurrection, which gets pretty gross in areas. With it set in the timeline between Alien and Aliens, there is of course nods to the events of the first film and what we would see in the sequel. We see Weyland-Yutani already terraforming, so the big power stations to make the air breathable are visible on the planet with a mining colony. The film also doesn't forget about Prometheus, so this is a proper love letter to the franchise, and despite being a standalone story, it makes great attempts to keep within continuity of the series. So you can watch this without seeing the other films if you're going in fresh, but key moments in the story and even visual elements are in place for the fans to enjoy, or it may perhaps annoy them. It just depends how fussy you are on what you want from an Alien film. The visual effects are impressive throughout. I'm pleased they did a lot within camera with the practical effects. The facehuggers and shots of the xenomorph are clearly done with animatronics and performers in suits, and it works wonders. The look of the movie takes on this yellowy orange design, visually reminiscent of the video game Alien Isolation, which I know the director took some inspiration from, so you see parts of the space station that feel directly ripped out of the video game, which was really cool to see. The composer Benjamin Wallfisch has been smashing it out of the park with his recent scores, such as Shazam, The Flash and Twisters. He does a pretty good job with Romulus. He references the Jerry Goldsmith theme to Alien, which is always welcome because Jerry's work is so iconic, and it's a great way to please the fans and keeps it in line with the film series. Benjamin's original material works well for the most part in places to ramp up the horror, with a mix of classical orchestral themes, but with added electronic sounds that are manipulated with modern techniques that he had used on the Invisible Man score. These new sounds work in the film, but listening to them as part of the score separately, they aren't too pleasant on your ears. But the score does do a good job in servicing the film. The new material doesn't quite match the quality of the previous scores such as Alien 3 or even Alien Covenant. So I was a tad disappointed the score didn't capture my attention as I had hoped. Overall, I really enjoyed Alien Romulus. I think there's a few nitpicky moments. There are two scenes that are going to divide the fan base. Most of them are very vocal about their passion for the franchise, and often the case when the filmmakers take a few risks in the sequels or prequels, some fans just go apeshit. So I'm expecting some arguments now and into the future about what the film introduces. By the end it does get really creepy. I sat there saying to myself, oh god, no, what's that? This is getting too much. When you get to see Rain use the early prototype pulse rifle, it's like a proper satisfying video game moment. I was just sitting there with a big grin on my face. Hearing those meaty pulse rifle sound effects rumble through the theatre was great. I recommend you go see it. It's a 4 out of 5 movie. It's a well-made sequel. I never felt bored. It gets us comfortably back into the Alien universe with great performances from the cast. Yeah, it's not as scary as I had hoped, but it does work well in getting you on edge and leaves you concerned about what's around the corner. It takes its time and doesn't rush into showing you the xenomorph, and it's the only one in the franchise to focus heavily on the facehuggers, which works extremely well in its favour. They do have a lot of fun with it. Romulus is pure fan service and made by fans, which can sometimes backfire, and you could argue it's a bit on the nose in some places with its callbacks, and how they introduced the alien from the start doesn't make much sense, but I personally had a blast watching it, and I hope it does well so we can return to these characters in future. But if not, then I'm happy we have another entry in the series that delivers on the expectations and doesn't forget what we love about the franchise. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.